For this final section of today's pod, we're turning to international matters and we are joined by a very special guest. Nicky Bandini is a brilliant journalist and a regular host of our fellow Stack show on the continent. She knows everything there is to know about Italian football, so we're going to be picking her brains on this. Today, we're discussing just how much of an impact the summer has had on the women's game in Italy and how the national team is shaping up heading into this international break. Nicky, thank you so much for joining us. Really happy to have you on the pod.
Gosh, I'm feeling the pressure now after you said I know everything there is to know, but very happy to be on. Thanks for having me on.
We are going to put that to the test. You're the expert in the field, well over me and Rach. So we want to know everything. We want to pick your brains on everything Italian football, and we will. To be honest, we are going to probe. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the Euros, because obviously we've just come off the back of an amazing summer for Italy. I feel like it really kind of established them and put them back on the map as being one of the greats in the game. It was a harrowing game to kind of watch, losing obviously 2-1 to England in the semi-finals, but that was the furthest they've gone in the Euros since 1997, where they reached the final in what was then just an 8-team knockout. First of all, how much did that run and this team kind of capture the public's imagination over in Italy? Because over in the UK, we feared the Italian squad like no other. I think there was maybe a bit of complacency of kind of seeing Italy and England match up and thinking, okay, on balance, this should be an England game, absolutely fine. But Italy's run of the tournament had been so incredible that you really did not know which way this game was going to go at all. But yeah, what was the reaction like over in Italy?
It was definitely one of those things where it's hard to gauge exactly when we talk about capturing the public mood, like exactly where things have landed. For certain, it's the most interest that I've seen in women's football in Italy for a long time. And you look at the hard numbers. I think it was just over 4 million people watched that semi-final on Rai Uno, which is about a bit more than a quarter of the market share, which is good. I mean, you put it in perspective sometimes when you see other things. And for instance, the men's team, when they played their World Cup qualifier against Israel this month, was 7.6 million. So still a gap there that feels bigger than you want it to be, I suppose. And I think I was frustrated at times with the way I saw it being covered in the Italian press. I mean, leaps and bounds forward from the World Cup, by the way. I think infamously we remember the World Cup in Australia, there were press conferences for the Italy camp where there was literally no Italian journalists at them. And that was pretty grim. And obviously there's things that go into that include travel and distance and things like that. But still, the absolute lack of coverage was really something in that tournament. And I think, for instance, like when Italy won the quarter final at these Euros, I was, of course, picking up all the papers the next morning, and Gazzetta dello Sport, the biggest national daily sporting paper, it was on the front page, but it wasn't the lead story. You know, it was a banner at the top of the page, and the front page was still mostly given over, I think, to yet another Ademola Lookman transfer story. So there are times where I still wanted to get in there and give people a shake, but it was definitely causing or getting more attention than women's football has traditionally got a lot of the time in Italy. And I think that was a meaningful impact. And you kind of go from there to the more anecdotal. I was in Italy for the semi-final. I was in Bologna, and I remember going into a bar to watch that game and asking them, can we have this game on in an hour's time? And honestly, the bar staff didn't know it was happening, even though it was a bar that chose for sports. And that was a bit of an eye-opener. At the same time, by the time the game was done, we had, I don't know, 60, 70 people in the bar all watching the game. So it's hard sometimes. I do think, for better or worse, sports, and it feels wrong to divide this way between women's football and men's football. I shouldn't be talking about those two things as two different sports, because it's the same bloody sport, but just in terms of the way it's covered, it's treated almost like it is a different sport in Italy. And I think it's a bit that, what I would call, for a British audience, it's almost like the Wimbledon effect. There's a lot of interest when there is the big thing that's happening. And it was the same recently that the women's volleyball teams had a lot of success as well. And when that's been happening, it gets a big buzz and a lot of attention. But then people, as soon as it's over, can forget about it again quite quickly. And I think that's a bit where it felt like things were this summer. It was great. It was exciting, and people were talking about it. Really, in one of those odd not lovely life moments. Actually, the reason that I was in Italy for that semi-final was because I was there for a funeral, my aunt's funeral. So I saw a lot of my family around that time, and I would say all of them knew about the women's team. All of them wanted to talk to me about the women's team. All of them wanted to hear about stuff. And then when I asked them who was watching, I would say there was a pretty solid divide between the older family members who were honest about it and said they weren't watching, and the younger family members said they were watching. And maybe that's like the encouraging part is generationally it felt like perhaps more interest among younger members of the family than older ones.
I wondered as well, because there was a real romanticism around Italy's journey in the tournament, and I wondered if the manner in which they went out would have maybe a bit of a bigger impact, because it reminded me a bit of, I don't know if you remember this, when Laura Bassett scored that own goal in the 2015 World Cup, and there was such heartbreak because you kind of felt like this was their moment to get into a final, and they lost it in such a kind of almost cruel manner. And there was that kind of feeling around the Italy team. They were so close to this final. There was, I was at their quarter final where they beat Norway, and just the emotion and the passion from the fans in the stands, from the players on the pitch, from Girelli getting those goals. And it just felt like one of those romantic football stories. And I wondered if the manner of their exit would kind of hit home a little bit further than if they just lost like 3-0 in the semi-final.
I think that's definitely true. And I think maybe this comes back a bit to my feelings about like the Wimbledon comparison in growing up, because I'm half Italian, but I did grow up in Britain. And I think, that so much of these stories, the way they resonate with people comes down to individual characters and individual personalities. And of course, in England with Wimbledon, it was always Tim Henman, wasn't it? Tim Henman getting close and never quite getting there, and that for such a long time made people, I think, relate to him in a different way. And I think that, if anything, for me in sport, the cult of the individual, the cult of the personality is bigger than it's ever been. I think that with the way young people follow sport, you're both much younger than me. I'm an ancient when it comes to this stuff, and I look at the way I think younger people relate to sport. A lot of it does come through much more social media channels and how they feel about individuals, and you see that in terms of how clubs recruit even now, thinking about the commercial side of things and what it's going to do for social media impact. That is absolutely a conversation that happens at board level with recruitment sometimes, and I think that Girelli certainly and Bonansea have had that cultural cut through in Italy. I think they already had it to some extent, but they achieved it much more because of the way this tournament went and their role in it. And I think those figures now have a cultural resonance, an awareness in the mind of the Italian public that they wouldn't have had without exactly the images you're talking about, the emotions, the goals, the oh my God, we were so close moments. I think those things absolutely have an impact. The tricky thing, of course, is I've just named two people who won't be playing for that much longer for the national team, and so you need different people to come through and keep sustaining that. But I do think, yes, emotional investment in people's stories has a big knock-on impact for how much people care in the end.
100%. And I think we find that in sort of UK football as well, where we kind of place so much emphasis around some of the big heroes, the icons, your Rachel Daly's at one point, your Chloe Kelly's now, Michelle Adjaman's kind of become a hero in her own right after the Euros. But you mentioned there sort of Girelli obviously being so crucial to that Italian side, and she did there were so many magical moments that came from her and so much passion, and you could see how much she kind of delighted fans every time she stepped onto the pitch. And obviously you mentioned there, career-wise, she's 35 years old, she's my age, she's kind of maybe knocking on the door of retirement at some point in the kind of nearish future, although you never know. You've seen players go on and play for many more moons, so I don't want to cap her career in any sense, but such an experienced player. Obviously this was her fourth Euros that she played in. Do you kind of could see her continuing to be a leader and a kind of figurehead for this side, and do you feel like potentially Italian football might be missing out on making more of those individuals and kind of heroing and profiling them to kind of raise awareness around the team as well?
Yeah, I think Girelli has been pretty candid about it, actually. Like she said, I was thinking this might be my last tournament beforehand, and then I got to the end of it and I wasn't sure I wanted it to be anymore, and she said that she's going to listen to her body and her mind, was I think her way of putting it, and decide where that goes. And I was listening just last week to Francesco Totti talking about how basically he regretted retiring when he did, even though he kind of got forced into it a bit by the end, and saying that he thinks he could still have been playing on. You think, well, he's 49 now, and maybe at some point someone does need to give you that nudge, and you don't want to be that person who needs to be forced out. And I think Girelli certainly is not at that point. Clearly, she was so impactful this summer, and I think she, in the way she's spoken, has shown a lot more self-awareness perhaps than Totti sometimes does. I mean, she said quite specifically in one interview recently, I want to keep on playing, but I also am conscious that I don't want to be the person who's getting in the way of younger players having their chance and having their opportunities. I think she's really got that opportunity to be, again, a cultural cut-through figure. I hope she'll still be playing at the World Cup in a couple of years. I hope it'll be at the World Cup in a couple of years. I think that you want to believe there will be enough competition that it will be hard for her to start in 2 years' time, and that's the problem, I suppose, for Italy going forward as well. Is this squad showed so much good stuff this summer. In the end, they did still rely a lot on Girelli and Bonansea for those goals, didn't they? And I think that's a question which the national team has to solve going forward.
Well, it was only after Italy made it to the quarterfinals of the World Cup in 2019 that the Italian Football Federation made commitments to turn the top division professional by the 2022-23 season. I think it's pretty normal in women's football journeys for various nations that, the national team is the strongest force to bring more cultural focus onto women's football. Have we, I guess, seen that more in Italy since that commitment? Are we still over relying on the national team again, which I think is quite normal? It was the same in England. It was very much, the national team focus first, and that started to filter down. And I just wonder, do you feel like this journey, we might see a little bit of that filtering into the domestic season this time around?
Yeah, it's really tough, I think, still to know exactly where that's going to land. I think there's a lot of mixed signs. The first hugely disappointing sign was there was this, I think, horribly botched in terms of management and how they threw it together and how they advertised it. Serie A Women's Cup that they ran effectively right before the league season started, which is kind of a League Cup style tournament they tried to run in a shorter time frame. It was a new tournament. They tried to make it buzzy and exciting off the back of the Euros, and then they fell completely flat on the TV rights. They had a TV rights bidding window where basically they didn't get any serious bids, and they had to do some last minute scrambling to get the games aired at all on a couple of different platforms, and then you saw those games being played mostly in not very full stadiums. Like the final got 2,000 fans or so, and right after the Euros, when you've had such excitement around it, it's really disappointing to come from that. Now I think it would be hugely oversimplifying to say, well, that's the whole picture. I think that tournament was put together too quickly with not enough thought about the logistics of it, with not enough thought about how they were going to make sure it did carry that good stuff forward. And I think that unfortunately speaks to the state of Italian football federations, not just Italian Football Federation, frankly. I mean, I think you could talk to it at club level as well. Just the way that Italian football has been run in myriad different ways across the men's and women's games. There's very often this approach of jerking knees into quick fire decisions that aren't well thought through and coordinated and done in a way that's going to lead to the best result, in my opinion. So I think that was a bit of a come down to go from the Euros into that. I think that in terms of the overall health of the women's game, I think it's very much one of those, you need to take a step back and see the big picture things, because yes, the season's now up and running, the league season, attendances, I think you could certainly look at them and think they feel pretty underwhelming. We're talking less than 1,000 people at most games, and that's not where you want to be after the Euros, where everything felt so big and buzzy. There was a survey done in was it June or July, but too early to really see the impact of the post-Euros, certainly, which was showing that you had 45,000 or so registered women's players in Italy, which is an increase of 7% from last year. If you go back much further to when they started tracking these numbers, 2008, it's gone up from 18,000. So the growth is there. It's absolutely happening. It's just happening not at the rate of, for instance, other countries. You could contrast with England, and it's more like 200,000. It's 4 or 5 times as big. Same in Germany, places like France, Spain, a little bit behind, but still ahead of where Italy's at. So it feels like we're still in this phase of baby steps going forward, and you can't take all the negatives, because I feel like I've just said a lot of negatives about, oh, it isn't where we want it to be. You have to look at the big picture and say, well, it's moving in the right direction. Do I think they could have done more in terms of a bit better coordination of trying to capitalise on the moment they had this summer? Yes, I do. And that's why I keep saying it's a mixed picture. It's a mixed picture. It's not been immediately snap your fingers transformative, but I think when you dig into the numbers and you look at things, especially again, kind of calling back to what I said before about maybe the attitudes even in my own family, generationally, you can look at the increase of 10 to 15-year-olds playing, girls playing in the same period. I think it's gone up from 6,000 to nearly 20,000. So those are numbers that I think speak well to how things are trending. It's just it's a slow march rather than a sprint.
Well, I think that was going to be my next question, to be honest, in terms of the impact of the Italian women's national team being in the Euros and how well they progressed, sort of, and the impact that then had on domestic football, because we normally find that even in the UK, we're sort of seeing, the Lionesses do super well, and that leads to a direct impact and a positive sort of uplift of, attention, sort of awareness around domestic club football. But, I mean, Serie obviously only resumed at the start of this month, and Juventus obviously claimed the title last season, having been dominant, sort of a very dominant force in the league for so many years. Do you see the sort of major clubs kind of stepping in and trying to increase investment to make the league more competitive, or do you think it just still feels like it's just Juve and Roma sort of putting in that and sort of having that kind of big intention in the league every year?
I think there's a broader base that's growing of clubs that are putting that attention into it. I think again, want to talk about some positive signs. I think the decision to expand the league back to 12 teams this summer is a signal that there's clubs that are willing to put the investment in to make that worthwhile. I think you hear how, especially some of the foreign owners who've bought into men's football have also been wanting to put their attention into women's football as well, and I think that's been impactful. For instance, Parma with Kyle Krause, as soon as he came in, he talked about wanting to invest in the women's team, and he's done that. They're come back up to the Serie this season. Como as well. When you listen to the people who are running that club talk about how they view the club, they absolutely talk about the men's and the women's team consistently, and you see it in the way that the clubs are improving on the pitch. So I think there has been a broader base of investment into clubs, and I think that is slowly increasing the depth of the league, increasing the competitiveness of the league. You could look at even again the Women's Cup. The fact that Lazio beat Juventus in that cup maybe gives a little signal that there are other teams that are going to push a bit harder this season. So there are signs of gradual investment. I think the offset for Italian football a bit is that you're seeing some of the very best players. And bear in mind, we're a few years on now from professionalism in Italy, and that change, which has obviously been good. But you are seeing some of the best players increasingly looking to want to take their chances somewhere else where they can get to play in front of bigger crowds in more prestigious settings and have that experience as well. So obviously Sofia Cantore was already in America. Now Lisa Boatin's there as well. Caruso's gone to Bayern Munich. Linari at the London City Lionesses. You've seen quite a lot of Italians, of Italy's best players, looking to make those moves elsewhere. And I think that's probably for the good of the game overall anyway. And I think that that's not stopping there from being competitive football played in Italy as well. But I think that there is definitely a broader base of investment, whether it's the level of investment, whether it's the right nature of investment. Those are all things that we can question. And I think that for me, one of the things that still bothers me a bit is seeing how many of the teams are playing far away from what feel like their homes. I mean, Juventus play in Biella, which is an hour and a half's drive. Yeah, from the centre of Turin. It's like 2 hours by public transport.
And it's a tiny town.
Yeah, exactly. And then you see they do play, for instance, Champions League game against Benfica at the Allianz Stadium, and they get not a huge crowd, but they get 5,000 fans or so. It makes a difference, I think, where these games get played, and that stuff is a frustration for me, certainly. Well,
I mean, I feel like you're talking about a lot of things we've gone through over in England, and it does improve. So that's the one thing, is that it does get better. So here's hoping. Looking back to the national team, they play on Friday, first game since that semi-final. Feels like a really long time. Playing Japan and then Brazil in this window, and then you've got back-to-back games against the US in the next window. What's the mood like around the team going into these fixtures? Is there excitement about the fact you're playing the US twice? Does that still hold that kind of excitement factor?
Yeah, I think there's actually huge excitement around these games coming up, certainly within the camp. Again, there's a separation between how I feel about it, how the players feel about it, and is all of Italy paying attention? I'm not convinced that right now all of Italy's paying attention. Hopefully when the games actually arrive with the coverage of them, that will help build that up a little bit. But listening to Sonchin, the manager, talking about it, and just you could hear how proud he is, honestly, that these friendlies are happening at all. Because the fact is that these teams didn't necessarily want to have friendlies against Italy until quite recently. These teams are looking for competitive friendlies against the most competitive teams in the world. And as he said, getting to the semi-final, playing like we did against England, that makes USA, that makes Brazil think, okay, this is a worthwhile friendly for us. This is something that's going to give us a good challenge and help us to continue in our World Cup preparations, the same as it's helping Italy. So I think from the perspective of the players and the squad and the coach, there's a lot of excitement coming into these. We'll see what it does in terms of making a ripple in the media coverage, but I think there's a feeling that we earned this amongst the actual people involved in it. And it's obviously, I think these ones right at the start of a season are always a bit awkward. I think that goes men's and women's games, the first international friendlies, when you're just getting started, your club sides are a little bit tricky. There are some players going to miss them through injury as well. But I think these are going to be fun games to look forward to.
Well, looking a little bit further ahead, obviously you've got the qualifying cycle for the 2027 World Cup, and then this next few years. I mean, it's madness that we just finished the Euros and we're sort of already talking about the next major international competition. It kind of feels like give everyone a break, give everyone a minute to breathe. But do you feel like it feels like the sort of beginning of a chapter for the Italian team, or the sort of end of a cycle which might need sort of rebuilding soon? What's your take on that?
Yeah, these are questions that I've thought about quite a lot. I think I thought about it even as I was watching the aftermath of that semi-final. You thought, the problem is, again, I think I already said it earlier, the two players who ultimately were the ones putting the ball in the net, which I think in international football is just even more of a thing, right? I think because you have less time to work together, because you have less time to build those automatisms that are so important in domestic football, just having players who are going to do that for you really matters. And that's why when you look at the age again of Girelli and Bonansea, not to repeat myself, but you think that does make it hard for this project to go forward as it is. You do need other players to step up and have that moment. Now I think there's some really encouraging signs, actually, and maybe this goes back to what I was saying before about the increasing youth take up in Italy. There's some encouraging signs for Italy in the bigger picture, because Italy also got to the semi-finals of the under-17 and under-19 Euros this summer. Giulia Galli and Eva Schatz are both shortlisted on the shortlist of best young players in Europe. So you have got some really encouraging signs in there, and you've also got some players who I think really have taken that step forward and become leaders on the team, like Cantore this summer, who you think, well, yes, she's going to be at the heart of the next thing. Whether it's an evolution or it needs another rebuild, I think that's a bit harder to say with 2 years still to go until the tournament itself. And I do think even this summer when I was watching it, because of that thing I just said about automatisms, part of what I was thinking was, well, you know, Cantore, Bonansea, Girelli, these players had played together a bit at club level before, and so they knew each other. They know each other where they're going to be, and they know that stuff. So is it this next group that's going to have to carry forward? Is it going to need to be based maybe a bit more about this Roma side that is currently top of the league and showing the way more than the Juventus team that perhaps is having its own little generational shift at the moment, with some of those players moving on and some of them reaching these later points of their career? I don't know is the answer for 2 years' time. 2 years' time still feels like a long way off. But hopefully Sonchin can find the right balance. And I do think the other thing I always say about international football, we talk forever about the tactics, about the players. I think international football comes down a lot to the vibes. I really do. And that's my opinion as someone who's covered a lot of football, not just my opinion as like being lazy about it, because you have to want to be there. You have to want to be part of that project. You have to enjoy spending time with each other. And I think that so far, Sonchin has managed that really well. New tournament, new thing to build up to, but I have a certain amount of faith in him to do that.
Watch this space, essentially. Not too sure it's going to be the OGs still sort of paving the path, or whether this new wave is coming in. But yeah, still got a couple of years left to go to kind of see what happens. But thank you so much, Nicky, for joining us and giving us all your expertise.
Thanks so much for having me on. It was nice to have the excuse to talk about it. I don't get that many chances to talk about it, so thank you. It was fun.